Now that we've talked about editing basic text, I'd like to move on to the basic formatting tools set up in InDesign. You'll see here the same text that we were just looking at in the previous lesson. I've now added a title to it, so I can start to show you some ways that the text can easily be formatted in InDesign. Again, I'm going to use my Type tool, and I'm going to start by selecting that title that I've added up at the top. When I'm ready to start quickly formatting my text, most of my text formatting options will be available up in the control panel at the top. So you'll see I have a drop-down menu of all of my available fonts. I have a drop-down menu of the font styles available within that font, and then also font size, font spacing. We'll walk through each one of these individually. So let's start with the font. For this, I want a headline font. So I'm going to go ahead and select, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and select the stencil text, just to give it a little bit of a different look. This is the same heading I used in the document that I set together to be our sample document for the course. So you can see that's formatted the text a little differently there. I'm going to make my headline larger too so that it'll show up. So right now, text is usually set in points. I'm going to go up and I'm going to set this to 24 points to make my header a little larger. A couple of things that I'll note about fonts. The way that fonts work in InDesign is that fonts are grouped into families, and then within those, individual fonts or font styles are available. For the stencil font, there's really only one style available, which is the regular file. But for Minion Pro, which is what the other font is set in, if I click on this box, you'll notice that there are a number of different options for the style of the font. So the way to think about fonts is a general font family, things like Times New Roman, Arial, Helvetica. These are all things you may have heard of. Those are common fonts that are used. That's the basic font family. And then within that, there are options for bold, italic, and some fonts even have additional options such as semi-bolds, mediums, condensed versions. And what you have available, you'll find in this Font Styles menu. InDesign doesn't let you create what's called either a false bold or a false italic. You know, if you go online or if you're maybe in Word, I'm not even sure actually if Word still allows you to do this or not, but there's often a B button or an I button and you hit that and the letter all of a sudden looks a little bolder, or if you hit the I button, it shifts or slants to the right to make it look italicized. But those aren't considered to be genuine bolds or italics. Those are an algorithm that's applied to an existing letter. The fonts themselves have been developed by fontographers, typographers, people that develop fonts to look a certain way, to have a certain legibility and readability. And so they develop them to have a specific italic style, a specific bold style. And so that's what's contained within InDesign. You can select those by selecting them from that Font Styles menu, and it will only give you the options that are available to you on your computer. Once I've selected the font family and the style, then I can start editing the size and the spacing. So my next option is to select how large I want that font size to be. I'm going to go ahead and hit another carriage return just to give me a little space between my title. Right now I'm set to a 12-point font. Probably something between an 8.5 and a 10-point font is typical of read documents, such as the read text in a newspaper or a magazine. A 12-point font is usually a little bit large for reading, but often for web documents, fonts appear a little smaller online, so you may want to go with a 12 or a 14 size font if you're producing something for the web. So this first number at the top is my font size. The second number at the top refers to the spacing between the baselines. So what that means is, if I zoom in on my letters here, this leading number, which is what that spacing is called, refers to the distance between the baseline, which is the bottom of the letters not including descenders, such as the letter Y that dips below the line. So that's the distance from the bottom of the letters of one line to the bottom of the letters in the next line. A typical amount is to set that for 120% of the letter's height, which is how InDesign sets it automatically. That's what this 14.4 character indicates. So if I have 12-point font, InDesign will automatically set it to 14.4. But I can adjust that. I can make it either higher or lower. So I can select my text by highlighting and dragging with the mouse cursor. And I can move that spacing up to increase the space between the lines. Or I can move that spacing down to reduce the spacing between the lines. I also have the option to move it to a preset increment that's included within the program, or I can just enter a number myself. That's especially useful if I'm working with really big text because the presets don't include working with extra large sizes of text. I'm going to go ahead and set it. If I go ahead and set it to this auto number, it will set it back to the default. Also, I'm now going to hit Control-0 to zoom back out so I can see all of my document again. There are also some other options for formatting the type here. I can select these buttons for all caps or small caps. Small caps is when it takes capital shaped letters but sizes them to a lowercase height so that my capital letters are the full size and then the rest of the letters look like capital letters but they're a reduced stature. I also have options for superscript and subscript and for underline and strike through. The next options here have to do with the kerning and the tracking. The kerning has to do with the relationship between two individual letters and how they fit together. That's something that InDesign usually handles on its own, but if you're really advanced into typography, that's something you may want to play with setting yourself. The tracking has to do with the spacing between all of the letters and how much space they take up. The tracking can be useful to play with, for example, if you have a line and you have, say, a little bit that extends beyond the end of the line. I can highlight that. I can reduce my tracking slightly. Whoops. Highlight that, reduce my tracking slightly, and have everything fit together on the same line. So tweaking the tracking can be a way of formatting your text to fit very specific sizes or requirements. But in general, it's a good idea to try to leave the tracking as close to 0 as possible because that's what's been determined to be its most readable setting. In addition to being able to edit or to format the text from the control panel, there's also a character panel built into InDesign. So I can access that by going up to Window, Type in Tables, whoops, and then selecting Character. I'm going to pull that menu out so we can get a better look at it. And you'll see again here most of the same things that you have up here in the control panel. You'll see your font families, your font styles, your font size, your leading, your kerning, your tracking, and then also options for setting a horizontal scale, a vertical scale, and what's called a skew, which is slanting the letters artificially. In general, I recommend avoiding these, but there may be some instances where you wish to use them. You can see that if I want to see more or fewer options, I can click this button at the edge of any of my panels, and that will change the view of the panel itself. So if I just want to see a couple of options in my character panel, I can click once. I can click once again to reduce it just to its tab, and then click once again to see all of my options. The other thing that I'll mention about panels is that most of the panels are equipped with what's called the panel menu, which have additional settings that can be applied to the elements you're working on in the panel. The panel menu is indicated by this little downward pointing arrow with some lines next to it. If I click on that, you'll see that another menu pops up. And here's where I have my options for all caps, small caps, superscript, subscript, underline, strike through, and some more advanced options. I also have options in the character panel menu to set exactly how I want that underline and that strike through to look.